Okay, so last week we started to show you the scientific process of how to remove negative emotions from your life entirely. And this week we're going to continue on that path. If you haven't already seen episodes 2 through 4, you may want to go check them out to get the full benefit of this episode. They're only about 10 minutes long, so it's not that big of a deal. If you have seen them, this week we're going to discuss the portion of existence that helps create every instance of negative emotion that you have ever and will ever experience in your life. And also that, by the way, influences almost every decision that you make daily. Don't go. Welcome to the I Am Podcast, where we answer all the questions about spirituality and inner peace that you ever wanted to ask, and where we learn the secrets of humanity and divinity through a better understanding of both. Today, we're going to tackle the most misunderstood and most underestimated component of the body-mind-spirit model. It is the component of human existence that causes all emotional pain and suffering in the world. It is the component of human existence that has been the motivator of all aggression and conflict in the world. And I wish I could say it had even one redeeming quality to offset all this negative stuff, but it doesn't. The component in question is the ego. Now, I know you've heard the word ego, and if you're like most other people, when you hear the word ego, you probably think of the definition of an overinflated sense of self or an artificially heightened self-importance. But if that's what your idea of ego is, that is not correct. And it's important for you to understand the correct definition of ego. Here's why. The ego within you, and there is an ego within you, along with the equation of emotion, which we discussed last week, is what ultimately causes every bit of pain and suffering you have ever experienced in your life and you will ever experience in your life. It is the reason you've had every argument or fight that you've ever engaged in. It is the reason you get angry or sad or depressed or worried or fearful. And quelling it or killing it is the key to inner peace and to realizing the beautiful divine truth of the spirit portion that is within you. There are a lot of different definitions of ego floating around the planet. Some come from psychology, some come from religion, some come from our emerging understanding of spirituality. Oprah Winfrey, in her Soul series, where she talked to numerous spiritual teachers, liked to say that the ego was our life's story. Who you are, what you've done, etc. I particularly like Wayne Dyer's mnemonic for ego, edging God out. E-G-O. And I'm not going to tear all those down, especially Wayne Dyer's, because it's actually correct. But what I will do is provide you the ultimate, indisputable definition of ego that is not only going to withstand the test of time, but that is also the linchpin that helps us finally define and explain every emotion that exists, every human action that exists, and that gives us a scientifically definable path to inner peace. So here now is the definition of ego. The formal definition: it is the mind's perception of self. That's it. It's that simple. Ego is the mind's perception of self. The informal definitions: it is the laundry list of things that your mind points to when it tries to define you. When your mind tries to quantify you, when your mind tries to answer the question, who are you, that we discussed in episode 2, everything that your mind comes up with to assemble that answer is your ego. Whenever you think of you, whatever you experience in your mind right then is your ego. It includes things like your body image, the picture you see when you look in the mirror, your name, your likes and dislikes, your politics, your religion, your life story, things and people connected with you that get scooped into your mind's definition of who you are, your stuff, your friends and family. Basically, everything we talked about in episode 2 is your ego. Okay, so what's the big deal with the ego? Why is it so important to understand? As we discussed in episode 2, it's one of the biggest secrets of all the world's religions and non-religious philosophies that this ego thing is your false self. And it's what blocks you from discovering your true self and experiencing the bliss accompanied with uncovering that awesome, life-changing secret. From a spiritual perspective, it's the ego that stops you from being more spiritual. And the real tragedy is that this thing, this false self, basically runs your life with how much influence it exerts on you on a daily basis. Okay, so let's start with the easy stuff. How does your ego influence you? So let's say you're going out to buy a car. And beyond the obvious limitations of what you can afford, the first thing that your mind looks at is who you think you are. If your ego defines itself as a person who values utility and convenience over style and image, you wind up getting a minivan. If your ego wants to look good in front of the ladies, you wind up getting a Corvette. If you're looking at 4 different sedans from 4 different manufacturers that are all the same price, ultimately, which car you buy comes down to who you think you are. Am I a Toyota kind of person with the low maintenance and sleek styling, or am I a Ford person built by American hands and, ooh, look at all these cool Ford Sync tech options? Which car best fits my me? All the clothes you buy, all the TV shows you watch, even the food that you eat are all influenced by your mind's perception of the self. The entire field of marketing does nothing but try to play to who you think you are, or tries to change who you think you are inside your head so as to align it to a specific product or brand. So beyond everything you'll ever spend money on, how else does your ego influence you? In truth, your ego influences everything you do and how you interact with the entire world. It influences your romantic relationships. It helps decide whom you choose to be with. It influences your family relationships and how well you get along with your family. It influences your work relationships and how well you mesh with your coworkers. And we'll learn more about this stuff later, but right now, let's get to the good stuff. Let's get to how your ego creates all the negative emotions you have and will ever have in your entire lifetime. Okay, so the thing about your ego is that it's generated within your mind by your mind. Now, in human beings, the purpose of our brains and minds, biologically speaking, is to help define and understand the world around us so we, as human beings, can learn to survive in whatever environment we were born into after we leave mommy's belly. And this is how the ego is actually born, because the mind tries to identify and quantify you as part of the world. And it's an important feature that our brains and minds learn to understand the world so that we can know things like which plants to eat and which plants not to eat, and that it's not a good idea to take a salmon out of the mouth of a bear, and not to try to jump over too big of a hole lest we fall into it and die. So as part of this must understand the world feature, at any time the mind realizes one of its worldly understandings isn't perfect, it gets a little upset and reacts. Because after all, if you don't understand exactly how close you can safely be to a bear, that mistake can have drastic outcomes. 101 feet, safe. 99 feet, dead. So your mind takes its job pretty seriously when working to understand your world, and therefore the mind needs its definitions to be superior. And this is where the problem of the ego, the mind's definition of self, runs off the rails. The definitions and understandings within the mind must be proven to be perfect. Because again, if its definitions and understandings aren't perfect, 99 feet from the bear. So now, hold that thought. Enter the ego, the mind's definition of self. One of the definitions that must be correct in the mind, lest the mind have a meltdown. Okay, so let's say as part of your ego, you've decided after much deliberation that you have an interest in politics and have sided with being a Democrat or Republican, which becomes a portion of your ego. So that's part of your definition of self. I am Democrat/Republican. So then someone comes along and says, Democrats/Republicans suck. And you get angry. And here's exactly why you get angry. The ego is connected to the equation of emotion, which we talked about in episode 4. So when someone attacks something that is connected with your ego, it challenges the perfection of the definition that the mind has generated for you, which the mind cannot allow. So this then feeds into the equation of emotion. Your default expectation or preference is that your definition of self is perfect, but now someone is challenging that fact, which becomes your perceived reality. There's a difference between the two, the EP and the RP, so thanks to episode 4, we now know a negative emotion will be generated. And because it is the specific definition of anger, that anger is the emotion that results from a perceived external attack on the ego's valuation, thus you feel the anger within you as the result. I'm a Democrat/Republican. Yeah, well, Democrats/Republicans suck. Anger arises. I am a Muslim/Christian. Yeah, well, Muslims/Christians suck. Anger. Or let's say someone strikes your child. Your child is a portion of your world that you are very attached to. Big portion of your ego. Now somebody's got to hit the ground. Are you starting to get it? Because the mind needs to defend its ideas of you, and when something comes along that challenges its attachments, a reaction occurs. In the case of an external challenge from someone else, that your ego isn't all that, anger arises. In the case of an internal challenge from inside the mind itself, such as a thought like, I'm such a dumbass, where you're taking an attack to heart internally, then sadness is the result, because sadness is defined as a devaluation of the ego from within you, an internal attack. And at any point the ego questions its own valuation, fear arises. Not necessarily taking a devaluation to heart, but, maybe. Oh, look, a bear, 20 feet away. Holy shit. Am I going to continue into tomorrow? Am I, the ego, not awesome enough to get myself out of this? Fear. And at any point that your ego needs to redefine itself is when the tears come. Grandma dies. Tears. You have a religious experience that redefines you. Tears. You cry at the end of a movie. You've identified with the character during that movie so much that your attachment to that character temporarily becomes a portion of your ego, and the change that occurs for that character also occurs for you. Tears. Because if you don't connect with the character, you don't cry. And if that's the case, then you're all like, what a sappy ending. And we'll go into much deeper explanations in future episodes, but it's important to notice here that all these examples of emotions, and all emotions period, are caused by the ego feeding into the equation of emotion. Both need to exist and operate for specific emotions to occur. Okay, so we got some time. So what are some other examples? Let's take a simple one. Let's say you're playing a game, and you or someone who's playing with you has an angry reaction when they lose that game. A lot of people call this being a sore loser. What's happening there is that person, whoever's getting mad, has attached being able to win at things to be a validation of their egoic existence. And when they lose, the loss becomes an attack on their ego itself. This feeds into the equation of emotion, their preference being not that they win the game, but a little deeper, that they're the type of person who wins games like these. And when that doesn't happen, it's an attack on their ego, and a little meltdown occurs. Boom. Sore losing, fully explained to 100% accuracy in all cases throughout history. So you're starting to see how all this emotion creation process is beginning to gel, right? You're starting to kind of see how all the pieces work together. Well, we're just scratching the surface. We have a long way to go, but we're going to explain it in a way that everyone can understand it. And before we're done, you're going to understand your emotions better than a Harvard psychology professor does. And you're going to be able to get rid of negative emotions in your life forever when you understand the process. Because we can break that process. Pretty cool, huh? Homework for this week. I posted the diagrams for the body-mind-spirit model at the website with the individual systems breakdown diagrams all in one printable PDF. Go get the free PDF diagrams at IamSpirituality.com. Then, as you're looking at the small portion of the body-mind-spirit model that we've covered, start to think of how your ego has influenced the last few emotions that you've had. Because it has. And you might not be very good at it first, but don't worry. You're going to get good. Second, check out the audiobook from Eckhart Tolle called The Power of Now. He provides a pretty good explanation of the ego in both his big books, The Power of Now and A New Earth. And you can get either of them for free from audible.com because you're a listener to this podcast by going to www.audibletrial.com/IamSpirituality. Audible's awesome. I'm a long-time member. They have thousands of audiobooks, often read by the author or a professional voice talent, and Eckhart Tolle is awesome in audiobook form. They have a 14-day free trial. Go check it out. www.audibletrial.com/IamSpirituality. Next week, we'll dig a little deeper into our minds and the process of how it creates negative emotions with the relative valuation system and attachment of the mind, which we hinted at a few times in this episode. And share this podcast, people. We're just getting fired up. I am so excited. We're one of the new and noteworthy at iTunes under religion and spirituality. We're going to hit the top of the charts. See you next week. Peace.